Hello, I'm here today with Robin Ellison, partner in Pinsent Masons, the law firm. Robin, good afternoon.
Hello.
Good to see you. I've got a sense of déjà vu as we start this conversation about government pension initiatives. I've seen many wither and die over the years, and personal accounts has already started to be rebranded, and are we on the inevitable decline now? Why can't we seem to get it right?
Yeah, it's a good question. As you say, we've had innumerable initiatives going back really to the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and Turner's report more recently. So there's been no shortage of initiatives. I think the difficulty has been that all of the initiatives have looked at individual aspects of the pension system and not the pension system as a whole. And we've got to a stage now where each of the individual parts has been reformed and improved and changed. But the system as a whole is creaking, and it's creaking so badly that it really needs a step back and look at what it is we're trying to do with the pension system, both the state pension system and the private pension system. And you mentioned the personal accounts coming on stream, which have now been rebranded as NEST. It's a third rebranding in the series. And it provokes the question, do we really need an additional fourth state pension to the system we've got? We've got a basic state pension system, which is really quite complicated. It sounds simple, but it is quite complicated. You've got 5 different varieties, including 25 pence when you get to 80, which is a great encouragement to live longer. You've got a second state system, which was SERPs, is now S2P, and is equally complicated, contracted in, contracted out, moving to a flat rate system. Very complicated to administer. We've got a third state pension system, which is state pension credits and guarantees and so forth, which is so complicated. Around 5 billion a year goes unclaimed, mostly obviously by people who really need that kind of money. And now we're bringing on stream a fourth state pension, the NEST. About which the jury is still out forget whether the policy works, which it probably won't, but we're not sure that the clockwork will tick. Trying to build a system within 12 months to cover between 8 and 25 million people is a challenge for most of us. And the history of most government computer systems has been mixed, and the question is, will they manage to do it this time? And I think it's going to be a struggle.
Right. Is this what's really behind your well-publicised debate with Angela Eagle?
Yes. Angela Eagle I thought was very good. She got the better of me in the debate. Unfortunately, she knows how to manage a debate. But the issue with Angela Eagle was not so much on that. The reason we had a slight spat was on her view on the tax system. And of course, Angela Eagle's issues are not tax. She deals mostly with the Department of Work and Pensions, and that's her project. But on the tax side, which she has to relate with the HMRC and the Treasury on as well, I think the DWP have kind of lost the plot a little bit, because the new anti-forestalling rules are just another complication on a system which was intended to be simplified 5 or 6 years ago. You shouldn't use words loosely, but there are a lot of very wrong and strong words you could use about the anti-forestalling system. And the $100,000 question is, will it make any money for the government, which is a reasonable question, and do we need it to maintain fairness and equity between the various interest groups in pensions? And I think it's pretty clear that it's been done as an ad hoc short-term measure, really just as a soundbite policy on tax, rather than either A, trying to raise money, or B, trying to be fair between the various interest groups. It's perfectly reasonable to charge rich people more tax than poor people. That's not an unreasonable thing to do. The question is this the way to do it? And clearly anybody who's read the legislation can see that it's a very foolish way to do it.
Well, isn't it likely that these extra costs will in the end be absorbed by the employers of the people concerned setting up the pensions, as indeed is happening with bankers' bonuses? The city is beginning to go away from the...
Sure. Well, you've got two costs here. You've got the administrative costs, and employers will absorb them. They won't like it. It'll be an extra expense on the software development and the paperwork they have to keep and all that kind of stuff. The costs of the tax will not be borne by companies. Bankers obviously have printing presses of their own, but most people in most companies do not have their private printing presses. And individuals will have to pay the tax, if there is any tax to pay, or they'll restructure their arrangements to reflect that. And the law of unintended consequences of behavioural changes will make sure that the government won't get the kind of income that they're pretending they're going to get. There is a perfectly valid tax system in place already where rich people do pay more than poor people, and there's no reason why it should have been changed.
Robin, I'd like to come back on a point that we talked about earlier in relation to the possibility that NEST, as it's now called, might be disbanded. Do you think that either this government, if re-elected, or a new government might go for the political expedience of cancelling personal accounts but leaving auto-enrolment and compulsion on the statute books, because that would effectively solve the problem in the short term.
Sure. And auto-enrolment and compulsion is something which was abolished under a Thatcher administration many years ago, and perhaps with hindsight was one of the mistakes that were made then. And reintroducing it would probably be acceptable to most people. I wouldn't have thought there'd be a political kickback on that. I think there are two issues with the NEST system that an incoming government's going to have to look at very, very profoundly. One is the policy. In other words, does it do the job of helping those at the lower end of the income scale build up an income for retirement? And you have to take, as the DWP did, very ambitious discount rates by putting in fairly modest amounts of money in the early days and doing it over 40 years to actually come to anything reasonable. So I think that there's a big question mark over whether the policy objective will be achieved, even if it works. That's question number one. Question number two is, can they get the adding machine to work? Answer, nobody knows, but it looks like a bit of a challenge, knowing the history of big computer systems. And number three is the issue of the costs, and the upfront costs are in the billions. The setting up system, cost of setting up systems like this in the billions. And if you're an incoming government and you tell each of your departments that they're going to have to save X billion or 20% of the budget or whatever it is the mantra of the moment, it's an easy cut, especially when companies are a bit pressed on employer costs. To save 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% on employer overheads in the early days, to save the 4 or 5 billion it's going to cost us out of the computer system, an incoming government's going to have to be a pretty strong outfit to resist that kind of quick gain. And my guess would be that the odds are pretty high that an incoming administration would cancel the whole project. It looks to me, I wouldn't say it's 100% guaranteed, but it looks pretty high.
But you're not suggesting that employers should bide their time before deciding how they're going to
if you're asking me as a lawyer,
if
you're asking me as a lawyer, I would say they should think twice before spending a lot of time, money and effort in changing their strategy at this stage. I think you really need to wait until perhaps 2 or 3 months after the next election to see which way the wind is blowing. I wouldn't spend a lot of money just at this time in the cycle.
But if auto-enrolment and compulsion,
sure,
in avoiding the jargon, is all we're left with, is that necessarily a bad thing? When we had it before,
absolutely, it didn't. We had nobody panicked when we had it before. It seemed to work pretty well last time round. Took a lot of the pain out, a lot of the sting out. Absolutely, no, I'm not against that as a principle.
It does seem to me that when employers have those sort of responsibilities, then it rather concentrates the mind about how they can use that to get the best out of
absolutely.
the situation.
I think there's a slight misunderstanding about how employers feel. I think we've been through a period in the last 15, 20 years where there's been a feeling that employers have to be read in tooth and claw and they really don't care about their workforce. That happens. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. But my experience is that in practice, most employers, most of the time, do worry about what their workforce are going to do as it ages, even though they may only be with them 10 or 15 years, not a full 40 years, as was alleged to have happened in the olden days. And the responsibility of HR directors and FDs and chief executives in relation, or their paternalistic obligations, is still there, even though we're not in the 19th century. And I think what's unfortunate is that the structure that we built discourages them from adopting paternalistic attitudes. And that's a tragedy.
Robin, thank you. We've covered a lot of ground here today, but we still have some months to go before the election itself. I hope that we might perhaps be able to get together again after the election when the dust has settled and see if any of our predictions have come true.
I look forward to it. It should be great fun.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed our interview today. Do let us have your comments on the site, and we will pass feedback on to Robin in order to ensure that we have plenty to talk about on our next session. Thanks for watching.